Hello, peeps.
Hello, our members. We are so happy you could join us today. And if anyone wants to ask questions live, as usual, please let us know in the chat or raise your hand, and we'll be happy to address that. But we did get a really good one that I don't think we've addressed yet related to improving sleep with neural retraining.
Mm.
So I wanted to dive deep into that today because I imagine it will help a lot of people. And I will talk briefly about lifestyle and functional medicine things that can make a difference there too. But our whole philosophy and the reason we do what we do is because our goal is to get people to be more resilient in terms of their nervous system state and their sleep, which is very related. We think neural retraining, if it is enough, is the most sustainable way to do that. Sometimes people go down the rabbit hole with lifestyle modification, and some of those things are really good things to do. However, we can then become sort of attached to those lifestyle modifications we made to try to improve sleep. And then it becomes a big stressor when we can't control all those factors, like when we're traveling, right? And so we don't want to be overly attached to things like that, such that it causes a stress response and interferes with sleep. So I will talk about those ways you can sort of help manage sleep and improve sleep. But while I talk about those things, keep in mind that my perspective on some of those things is that in most cases, many of them are not going to be necessary, and that if you do need to use them, that you be very aware if you are starting to put a lot of pressure on those things and go, oh my God, if I don't have this supplement, I'm going to die because I'm not going to sleep. If those kinds of things are running through your head, then there's too much of an attachment to your sleep protocol. We're trying to induce flexibility in regards to things related to your health so that they don't become a stressor. Let's dive into sleep if everybody's ready for that. So, with the neural retraining approach to sleep, my perspective is that there might be two paths you might need to take, or you might only need one. So, the first path is really just about regulating your nervous system better overall,
Hmm.
right? If you are consistently dysregulated throughout the day and night, then your sleep is going to suck. Those two things are interrelated. Of course, if your brain thinks that there's a big threat of some kind, it's not going to let you fall asleep, right? It wants you to stay awake and aware of that perceived threat so that you can defend against it, right? Sometimes, and this is very common, all people have to do is basically follow the calendar of regulation activities we've set out for you. And with time, the sleep should either quickly or gradually improve. I had a new client I started working with recently who's doing the program and did a few private sessions with me. And his sleep was actually the first thing to improve. It was literally like a week into doing this work and he started sleeping well again. So it can be sometimes a pretty fast transformation, but everyone's going to be different. So don't put pressure on that. Some people, it does take longer. And if you are farther away from regulation, then it may take longer for you. Usually the process is more gradual.
So Karen, I hear a theme already emerging
Mm-hmm.
already about pressure,
Mm-hmm.
putting pressure on, adhering to sleep protocols or having things just right,
Mm-hmm.
or having an idea about the shoulds or, any of that stuff. So as everyone's listening through this, if sleep is something that you're looking to improve, maybe that can be an area that you can kind of keep just hearing like, oh yeah, when she said this, oh, I do put pressure around that. you know, just sort of like, hey brain, like pay attention to anything for yourself that you might start hearing about how you might be doing that.
Yep.
So,
Yep. Cool. So that approach, I think, is fairly simple. Like I said, you just follow the calendar that we have laid out for you of activities to do. And with time, your nervous system will become better regulated, and then you will sleep better if that was the only issue. The other issue that can occur with sleep is that you may have some specific links or associations in the brain to sleep or to insomnia that have tagged either of those as a big threat. So This is more common for people who have had chronic insomnia. Because when you have chronic insomnia and you struggle to sleep for days on end, then it is a normal reaction to start to feel stressed about sleeping and not sleeping. So when the brain makes that association, as we've talked about with any association to threat, what happens is when you get closer to that perceived threat, the brain will produce a stronger survival response or will produce a survival response. So as an example, as you get closer in the day to bedtime, you may have a progressively stronger and stronger stress response. And that would be happening at a subconscious level if you've made these links. But you can also, of course, fuel the survival response with what you're thinking. So if you are spending your thoughts thinking things that are stressful about sleep, then that is likely to make that survival response worse. If you are somebody in this category, then what you would want to do is the daily sort of nervous system regulation practices as lined out on the calendar. But then you would want to spend some time doing some self-reflection, gathering some information about all the associations you have to sleep and not sleeping, and then bring those into some processes to work on specifically. So that could be any of the rewiring processes, the featherings, the pattern interrupt processes, the parts work, or the dance processes. So whatever is your favorite or works best for you, then you can go that route with rewiring those things. So let's talk about the kind of things that you may want to reflect on before you get started with that. It's always the same three things, but I'm going to bring it up every time so that, if you haven't noticed the pattern yet, it sinks in a little deeper. But the first thing is, what are your emotional associations to sleep and not sleeping? If when you think about bedtime or you think about sleeping tonight, you start to feel anxious or you start to feel frustrated or you start, any other thing on the spectrum of negative emotions as we sometimes label them, all of those things are going to relate to a stress response. So you want to make note. These are all the things I feel when I think about sleeping or not sleeping. And I will continue to say both because in your brain, they're related, right? So, when you try to go to sleep, sometimes you sleep, sometimes you don't sleep. So anyways, you can just reflect on both and see what comes up. The other thing is your beliefs, right? What are you believing about yourself and sleep that may be fueling a stress response to sleep, right? I have been an insomniac myself, and I definitely faced in myself doing neural retraining that I had strongly identified with being a bad sleeper over the course of many years of struggling with sleep. And so that's not a helpful belief, overly identifying like, oh, this is a fault in me. This is something wrong with me. Again, anytime we imply there's something wrong with me, the brain takes that as a threat because it's saying there's something wrong. Essentially, that boils down to there's something wrong. And so the brain will then go, oops, danger. Another type of belief systems that's really common with sleep that I would suggest you look for in yourself is whether you tend to think that you cannot sleep without certain conditions being met. That's a super common one for chronic insomniacs who have done everything they can to manage sleep in terms of the lifestyle and other factors. So for some people, it may be medication. I can't sleep without Ambien. And other people, maybe I can't sleep without a dark room and a noise machine, right? Everybody's got their own little attachments, but that kind of attachment to anything that may not always be present, that could be a problem in certain situations. Like if you go on a trip and you're like, oh crap, I forgot my Ambien. You may have this huge stress response if your belief system is it's impossible for me to sleep without Ambien. Right? So look for those things. And then another common belief system that I see a lot in regards to sleep that really fuels stress responses around it are the if-thens. If I don't sleep well or enough, then dot, dot, dot. And that could take many forms. But if it is a stressful form, if it's something that's saying it's going to be a disaster, I won't be able to function, people will think there's something wrong with me because my brain will be foggy, whatever it is, if it doesn't feel good to think about that happening, then you're creating a stressor inside yourself when you think about sleep and about not sleeping. So that's a good one. Do you have any other belief systems that stand out for you, Tamara, that could be problematic with sleep?
Oh yeah. I mean,
There's a lot, but
I'll die.
mm-hmm.
Lack of sleep will give me an early death.
Mm-hmm.
It's that the conversation out there right now about how unhealthy and bad for our health not getting out a full 8 hours of sleep brings. So, just being more loose with that. There can also be like, there's a pattern, like I always wake up after 3 or 4 hours, and then you look at the clock, and then you notice the time, and now you're sort of reinforcing like, oh, I have this thing where I always wake up after blah blah blah. That's sort of finding a pattern, then making the pattern mean something.
Mm-hmm.
It might just mean like you're drinking water and you tend to have to pee then, or something.
Mm-hmm.
It could be any number of things,
Yeah.
a couple nights in a row that happened and then it just started being a thing. Sometimes there could be some other reason why that's happening that's more physiological, but even if there is, it's not productive to build story around it. Unless the story is a story that's going to support you being relaxed, right? Like I loved what you said, Karen, about when I think about it, does it make me feel good? If the answer is anything other than yes, if it's actually creating any amount of worry, concern, fear, you know, anger, frustration, does that sound like you want to fall asleep if you're worried or anxious or frustrated? It's arousing the nervous system into survival. Or even the belief like if I wake up unrested, like my day is going to be terrible. Catch the words you're actually saying. If you can actually hear them, bring them to a retraining thing.
Right. So, yeah. So, as we, have talked about before when working on beliefs, like the goal is really to dissipate your emotional reaction to that idea, to that thought, right? Because that is what makes these thoughts feel so true, is the emotional backing to them. So, if you take that to one of our belief focused processes, like the tap it up, tap it down process that Patty did, that's a great way to dissipate that emotional association to that thought and then replace it. So I think in that process, she prompts you to go, well, what kind of belief would actually serve you in this situation? And it's going to be things that feel good. It's going to be things that don't feel stressful, right? Like if I don't sleep 8 hours tonight, it's not the end of the world. It's going to be okay, right? I may not prefer it, but it's going to be fine. Mm-hmm. That kind of thing. Or my brain is learning how to relax and therefore sleep better. So my sleep is going to get better and better as I keep regulating my nervous system. That would be a helpful belief system.
Karen, I think there's another one which you might be getting to, which is to use brain training to address some of the things that might be really sabotaging sleep as well, right? Like there is something to be said for staring at a flashlight for a couple hours before you go to sleep.
Oh, yeah. That's lifestyle stuff. We'll talk about that for sure. And yes, you may need neural retraining associated with that.
Yeah, since we're talking about the brain training part of things, remember that you can use brain training to help you shift behavior to support. It's really common sense. We all kind of know better.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like one of the things, the big ones that you're talking about is looking at bright lights at night, right? And I've talked to so many people, I'm just like,
yeah, like,
look, it's not that big a deal. All you have to do is either not use your phone or your TV 2 hours before bed, or you get a pair of blue blocking glasses. And I've had so many people be like, oh no, I couldn't do that. That's so dorky, or that's so weird. And so that's an emotional reaction they're having to making a behavioral change. And so if something like that comes up in regards to making a change that would benefit your sleep, then you can neural retrain that. You can take that to a process and dissipate the emotional reaction to that until it feels like, oh, yeah, well, I don't know why I was fighting that. It's not a big deal. I can do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
That kind of where you were going with that, Tamara?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Cool.
Yeah. I've seen yours, Karen.
Yeah, they're super dorky. They look like welding glasses, but I don't give a shit because they work. So what do you really want? Do you care more about sleeping, or do you care more about looking dorky at night? Or do you care more about, watching TV, right? So you can prioritize. I have no problem with you prioritizing whatever your priorities are, but I'm guessing your priority is probably going to be sleep. And if that's the
Yeah.
case, then
But
address the other things.
well, I just love it because then you can watch your weird history documentaries about
Cleopatra and Rome. Yes, that's what I've been watching lately for whatever reason.
with her
Having a
little
History
orange
Channel kick.
glasses.
Yes.
uh,
Let's see what our comments are here before I move on. It's
oh,
great info, crazy coincidental. I woke up at 4 a.m. and there was no going back. Sugar at bedtime is no point no. Yeah, that's a good point. We will talk about that lifestyle thing. I'm so sorry you woke up at 4.
and then we have one more question for someone that needs to pop off.
Yes. I have a meeting coming up this morning. Can you give me more info on the glasses? Are they the orange ones? Can you recommend a source for blue blocking glasses? Yeah, there are a lot of places to get them now. I personally got mine on Amazon, but the key to them working is that the lenses have to be like a dark orange or even a red. So the oranges are the good ones for, let's say like 7, 8, 9 p.m. But when you get to like bedtime, 10 p.m., then you want to switch to red, ideally, if you still have a lot of bright lights in the environment. And so orange blocks less blue light than red. And that's why you make that transition as you get closer to bedtime.
You wear the red and you'll just want to go to bed earlier.
Yes.
The reason
Yeah.
why we keep staying up so freaking late is because we've put the sun inside of our house.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Like, I've still got a ton of energy at 10 o'clock at night. Like we should be passing out. If the sun has gone down at like 8 or 9, we should be tired. Like it's been dark for hours and you're still like jamming. It's because we're just standing in front of all these. That's what I say. Am I staring at a flashlight? I don't call it a phone. I don't call it a screen. I don't think they should call them screens. They should call them flashlights. You just, if you look at how bright they are, you can read by them practically. So yeah, it's very bright.
It's a significant life source. So I will post some of the varieties of blue blocking glasses in the forum, in the community, because I don't have the brands on the top of my head right now, but I will post them there and you can go check those out.
But you can't go wrong.
But thank you for that question.
Yeah, you can't go wrong, right?
To my knowledge, you can't. Some of them are just like higher quality than others, right? Some of them have plastic lenses, some of them have glass lenses, right? And so if quality matters to you, you can get more expensive ones, but I got cheap ones and they've worked great. I've had them for a decade, I think, and they still work just fine. So yeah, for me, like when I started playing with those, I noticed an immediate difference. I would start to get sleepy within 30 minutes of wearing them. And that didn't matter what time it was. So if I put them on at 8 p.m., I would start getting sleepier. Still, I would usually make it another hour and a half or so to my normal bedtime. But yeah, I could tell that I was actually getting relaxed and drowsy earlier. So
it's amazing.
Another comment at some point, maybe not today.
Oh no, just really one thing. It is such a big deal. Like if you ever do get a chance to go someplace where it does tend to be dark or like you're camping or something like that, like just play around with what it's like to be in the dark where there's no Wi-Fi or anything. You didn't bring whatever. And like, it is amazing to experience what it's like to actually follow a natural circadian rhythm. Like you do just go to bed when the sun goes down. Like you get tired and you go to sleep.
Yeah.
There's no desire to stay up. You're like, it's dark. Yeah. It's boring. It's dark.
Yes.
And in the morning, the sun comes up and you get warmer and you just get up. Like it's very simple. And this didn't used to be an issue until, we stared at flashlights and put the sun inside of our houses in the middle of the night. Like it's so great. So many people, overhead lighting, like it's like the sun, So.
Somebody was commenting about heat being an issue for sleep. Yeah, we are supposed to be cooler at night. Ideally, that is better sleeping conditions for the human. But if you think about it, there are a lot of humans living in the tropics and sleeping in 90 plus degree weather. So it is possible for the human being to do that. But I think it is harder if we're not adapted to it.
I grew up in Puerto Rico with no air conditioning.
Hmm.
We had a fan, and we just had a little light sheet,
Yep.
and you take a shower before bed, and you just sleep great through the night. I think a lot of it is like is again that conditioning thing,
Yeah.
and we've conditioned our air so much we're not adjusted for it. I guess people used to, maybe they didn't get as great sleep during the summers back then either, but they were also dealing maybe with a lot of bugs. So
Yeah. Yeah. Couple different
um,
factors there.
yeah, we don't have to be perfect with it. But if you find that that is a preference, like I know I definitely, do better, but it's because I'm conditioned to be in air conditioning, right? Like
Yeah.
I lived in
It's what
Florida
you're
for years,
used to.
yeah, so I think if I spent a period of time where that wasn't the case, it would renormalize.
Yeah.
So
I think so too. And I think, if you are having a stress response to it being too hot or it being too humid when you're trying to go to sleep, that would be the best thing to address in that moment. If you don't have control over the temperature and the humidity, then go for your reaction to it and help your brain feel safer with those conditions. It doesn't mean that you'll sleep amazing right away, but you're likely to sleep a lot better if you're not getting pissed off and stressed out by the environmental conditions, right? And
right.
like Tamara was just saying, if you do that for a period of time, you're probably going to adapt to those conditions.
And also there's a certain amount of this sleep perfectionism.
Yeah, it is. Yep.
Yeah, it's like, oh, so you get crappy sleep. You're hot.
Hmm.
It's a couple months of the year. Like, not to make light of it, because I know it can be very uncomfortable to be tired. I get that, because I deal with that. I have dealt with that, and it's just like, but to come to a place where it's like, all right, well then, I'm gonna try to find a way in my day, just to come to an okayness with it. Because more than anything, it won't get better if you're stressing about it. Really won't.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
maybe, what if it never resolved? What if your sleep is always just like that? So you're going to suffer every day of your life because you didn't get a certain picture of sleep, like turning it into this thing that you're suffering. Like it,
Well, it's suffering twice, right? As we talk about a lot.
oh, yeah.
So let's talk about the third thing that you may need to address in terms of unhelpful associations to sleep that your brain might have that may cause it to produce a subconscious stress response at bedtime or in the middle of the night. So, one of them is memories. So, some people have had really bad experiences in the middle of the night or experiences that were scary, stressful, startled them, things like that. Basically, something that caused a stress response, a nervous system reaction in the middle of the night or at bedtime, right? Anything in that realm where you would be sleeping. So, as an example, I had this client who the whole reason she came to me was sleep. And when we really dug into her experiences around sleep, there were a number of things that were not so great that happened in the middle of the night and that were stressors for her. Like when she was a kid, her dad used to come and visit and he would leave without warning in the middle of the night. And she didn't have his contact info and had no idea when she would see him again. So she didn't want to sleep because she
Oh,
didn't want to miss him leaving,
that makes
which
sense.
was really sweet and really cute and also seemed to carry over into adulthood. So we rewired that all her stress and memory around that experience as a kid. She also had some other things happen, like a fire broke out in their house in the middle of the night. So we rewired all those memories and she started sleeping normally through the night again. When we started working, she was only sleeping like 4 hours average, occasionally five. And she started sleeping 7 and 8 hours after doing that work. So sometimes memories are a big root of the sleep issue if you've had experiences like that. And the other type of memory that I see impact insomnia and sleep a lot is if you have been an insomniac or you've had some really stressful experiences in the middle of the night related to not sleeping, like you woke up and you like were so stressed about not sleeping, you had a panic attack in the middle of the night, or you just have, like for me, when I was working on my insomnia with neural retraining, I had basically this big compilation memory. My brain just condensed all of my bad sleeping experiences into this one conglomerate. And it was just kind of a felt sense of how it always is when I would wake up in the middle of the night and not be able to get back to sleep. So those kinds of memories too can play a role in terms of impacting your sleep today. I do this with clients with all kinds of health conditions. Let's say they have pain, and at certain points the pain was so severe they thought they couldn't cope. They had to go to the ER for it or something. Those kinds of instances tag that pain as such a big threat that then when the pain recurs, even if it's less severe, it can trigger a big survival response, right? And so the same is true with sleep and not sleeping if there's a big tag there of that being dangerous from your prior experiences. So those are good types of memories to rewire. Anything you want to add on memories?
If that's something that you have memories of medical practitioners, those memories might be helpful to go and work with as well. If you're someone that has gone and done sleep studies and whatever, and you have memories of doctors telling you things or parents telling you things, or maybe it's the belief system around sleep in your household. Maybe you watched your parents didn't get good sleep, or they would say things about how you have to get sleep. It could be some things like that.
Yeah.
The same way that we have cultural messaging and belief systems around it, which is a lot of what we're talking about today, which is that thing about like, you gotta do these things, you gotta have 8 sleep, you're gonna 8 hours every night, or you're gonna die, you know, like that's terrifying. Okay. Yeah, I would just look for any of those different places that might have sort of gotten in there. Yeah, what is your belief system about sleep? You know, even just articulating that might be really productive.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah. Cool.
yeah.
So that's what I was planning to talk about on the neural retraining front. So if anybody wants to add anything before we move on to the lifestyle and functional medicine part.
I will, or Patty will. We'll do a feathering process so that there's something you can actually just play. Those featherings can be very nice to fall asleep to. They get the job done, and we do our best to end those calls in a way that is quiet so it doesn't wake you up.
Yes, exactly. So if you have intermittent difficulty sleeping and it's not like this big pattern in your life, then, you know, what I would do in regards to that is really just soothe yourself when it happens, right? Soothe your nervous system, and hopefully that will put you back to sleep or put you to sleep in the first place. So if you just happen to have a really, really stressful day, you could use a feathering at bedtime to work on whatever the stressor was, you know, that's keeping you super aroused. Or if the stressor is, oh my gosh, it's 12 o'clock and I haven't gone to sleep yet, you can do the feathering on that. But same thing in the middle of the night. When you wake up in the middle of the night, the best thing to do is not to focus on sleeping. It's not to ruminate on the fact that you are not asleep, right? That will cause a stress response for most people. So you want to redirect your focus or your attention to something that feels soothing. But it should be something that is distracting for your brain, so your brain can't loop on thoughts about sleep. But it should also be something that is not super interesting to you. So featherings I think are a great thing for that. But the downside is, I guess, that you have to get out your phone in the middle of the night to listen to that. But you could also do something like listen to a podcast that you're not super interested in, but it's just enough of a distraction that it keeps you from focusing on the sleep. I don't personally like turning on a light and getting out a whole bunch of stuff like a book or whatever. I don't find that to work as well as listening to something, but everybody's different. And if you talk to sleep specialists, they will sometimes say, yeah, you can read a magazine or read a book. Just make sure it's really boring. Just make sure it's something that you are really not interested in. So that will serve the same purpose of distracting your brain, but also being boring enough that you could fall asleep to it.
If you're not wanting to get out anything, if you want to be able to just keep your eyes closed the entire time, they call it like yoga nidra, or really what they're having you do is just move through the different parts of your body and then just sort of check in and relax them. So it'll be like the top of your head, your scalp, the back of your head, your forehead, your eyebrows, your eyeball, your nose, your cheeks, your whatever. And they just move very, very progressively through all the parts of the body. You don't have to listen to a recording to do that. You can just, start at the top and make your way down. And then just
Yeah.
sort of like just notice what might be tense. So what is that doing? It's giving you something that's kind of boring.
Yep.
Not a very interesting thing to do. Like, oh, my scalp is fascinating right now. It's like, no, it feels the same it always does. But, then it's like, oh, yeah. And then just noticing where there might be tension. So you're relaxing. Are you getting tired?
Yes.
Are you bored at least if I keep doing this?
Right. So you don't have to even use a
focus on.
recording for that, right? If you
Yeah.
are good at keeping your focus on it, you wouldn't need a recording.
Yeah. So if it's something that you can actually hold your attention enough to and find your way into enjoying it, that can help you to relax and be bored enough to go back to sleep. If you're bored, you're not surviving, right? Like boredom and survival, those don't seem to go together.
There's one thing I wanted to add about the whole sleep thing. I had my spell of not sleeping pretty intensely at one point in my life. And what I learned that became incredibly helpful for me was to question the story I was telling myself about the fact that I wasn't sleeping. Right? So typically what that would look like for me was, okay, so I'm sitting here and I'm starting to feel panicky because I'm not getting enough sleep. Okay, Patty, what is the story you're telling yourself here? Oh, well, I'm going to have to get up and I'm not going to be able to do this. And this is going to be hard. And just this whole big, right, going right down to the end of the road with all the ways this catastrophe of me not getting enough sleep was going to impact the next day. And at the end of all that, I would start to almost laugh at myself a little bit like, okay, this is ridiculous because chances are none of those things are going to happen. Secondly, you've been through this many other nights and you get up the next day and guess what? You were still able to function. It did not kill you to not get as much sleep as you think you need. So there's that. Right. And as soon as I would kind of acknowledge that, like I would have a little look at what I was doing in my head and then look at it honestly and question it, this feeling of calm would come over like, oh, right, I have done this before. It's going to be okay. Even if I don't get any sleep, it's still going to be okay. Right? And then there's a letting go that happens at that moment.
Yes. Yep. So that falls into that category of beliefs that we were talking about, right? These thoughts that you say to yourself over and over again and you get emotional about, that's the belief category. So yes, add all your stories about sleep to the belief category and work on this.
What are the stories I'm telling myself about this?
We have covered a lot in neural retraining about sleep. So we're going to move on to talk about lifestyle things related to sleep and functional medicine stuff. So with the lifestyle things, there are some lifestyle things that you can do to improve sleep that have really, really good evidence behind them. They're very well supported by the scientific literature. And so I think they're worth doing. But again, we don't want to ever get to the point where we're attached to having them because there are definitely going to be situations in which you can't do all these things, right? And we don't want to harbor the belief system that we have to in order to sleep. So that being said, those factors are how close you eat to bedtime. So that's a very big one. And actually, studies show that if you eat within 3 hours of bedtime, you are likely to have more disrupted sleep. Now, there is a bit of a caveat to that for some people that have major blood sugar issues. Sometimes before you are able to correct that imbalance, you may need to eat closer to bedtime, but it's not ideal in the long term, right? This is just for management of physiological imbalance. And once that blood sugar issue comes back into balance, you would want to go back to giving a big gap between dinner and bedtime and not snacking in between. If you think about it, evolutionarily, our history is that we would stop eating usually when the sun went down. So it makes sense then that having a big gap between bedtime and eating dinner is what we were really designed for. What the science shows is that physiologically, it takes several hours, about 3, for your digestion to do enough of the work of digesting your food that it's not going to impact your sleep. So winding down all those metabolic processes in the body that are involved in digestion takes time. And so you got to give the body that space if you want it to be able to digest well and sleep well. That can improve sleep in a lot of different ways, but one of the ways is if you are inflamed already, especially if your digestive tract is inflamed, is part of that inflammation, then when you eat, that inflammation most likely increases a little bit. And so if you eat too close to bedtime, you can become a little bit more inflamed, and that inflammation can keep you awake. Essentially, inflammation in the brain causes more stimulation in the brain. The neurotransmitters involved in stimulating us, making us alert, keeping us awake, etc., are fed by inflammation. And so that's one other thing that could be going on if you're one of those people that's in the midst of some kind of inflammatory condition. The next thing is getting bright light exposure in the morning outside with no windows. So that has been shown to improve sleep in the evening, basically by setting your circadian rhythm really solidly. The ideal is that you get out and you look at that outdoor sunlight first thing in the morning or as soon as you can after you wake up. And so I often do this and go just sit outside with my cup of tea and just have a moment and just take in the light. There are a lot of ways to do that, but the key is that outdoor light has way, way, way more lumen or lux or whatever than your typical indoor lights. So indoor lights are usually not enough to really solidly set that circadian rhythm. Sun lamps, as they call them, that are 10,000 lux at least, could be a substitute if you live in a really, really dark gray area. But even on somewhat cloudy days, the sun usually still gives us more lux than a sunlight. So it's still better to go outside if you can. And windows also diminish the amount of light that hits your retina quite a bit. So ideally, you are not inside trying to take in the light from outside. That's not the best way to do it. The next thing is avoiding light in the evening, as we talked about, especially blue lights, but bright lights in general are problematic, especially bright overhead lights, because actually the angle in which we take in the light plays a role in whether our brain perceives that as sunlight, as bright enough and as from the right angle to be sunlight, which sends that signal to the brain to wake up. So what I do in the evenings is I use very low wattage lamps. They're at my level, and I put on my blue blocking glasses at like 8 p.m., usually 8:30, something like that. And then the other way that you can do it, if you really are annoyed by the whole glasses thing, is you can get low wattage orange bulbs that don't emit those spectrums of light that would be most disturbing to your circadian rhythm. So those are pretty readily available. I would suggest a 40-watt bulb for that relaxing time in the evening. And then they also make orange 9-watt night lights. So if you're one of those people that really struggles to get to the bathroom in the middle of the night without a little bit of light, using a little orange night light that's very dim could be a good option, or using a headlamp or flashlight that has the feature on it, the red light feature. That is also a way you could go about that to not shine a whole bunch of bright light in your eyes at night. In regards to keeping things dark at night, yeah, it's ideal if your bedroom is dark. It's ideal if you have blackout curtains, especially if you live in a place where there's a lot of bright ambient light from other people's houses or street lights or whatever. But also think about devices in your room, right? If you've got some devices that are emitting a whole bunch of light, there are things you can put on them to dim that light or black that light out, like black light stickers and things like that. As an example, I have an air conditioner that we recently mounted in my bedroom in the window, and it emits this really bright light all night long. And so I'm just going to put a sticker on it so that it's not so bright. Keeping the room cooler does tend to result in better sleep. Not having pets in the bedroom goes a long way for many people to sleep better. If you have a really loud snorer in the bedroom, doing something about that can probably also impact your sleep quite a bit, right? A lot of people just live with this, but if you're waking up many, many times a night from your partner snoring, that can play an enormous role in the quality of your sleep. So either that partner ideally figures out a way to not snore, or maybe you guys sleep separately. It's not that big a deal. So consider it. I touched on this a little bit, but when you wake up in the middle of the night, if you have a pattern of being awake for hours and just sitting in bed while you're awake, stressing about it, or if you have had that pattern and you're now about to try to change it, the brain can actually link specific locations to stress responses. So if you have been an insomniac chronically, most likely, if you have had that pattern of staying in bed for hours, stressing about not sleeping, your brain has likely linked your bed to stress. I don't know exactly what sleep specialists think is going on in regards to this, but I will tell you that sleep specialists often recommend that you get out of bed if that's your pattern and you go lay down somewhere else, somewhere that isn't associated with stress for you, right? So lay on your couch or your yoga mat or something. And that is their way of breaking that link between your bed and stress. And if you're one of those people that goes on vacation and sleeps a lot better, this may be part of the problem. It's really common if you go to somebody's house or something like that and you're like, oh, I sleep better pretty much everywhere else except my bed. Ding, ding, ding. Your brain has that link.
That's a really nice telltale way to figure it out.
Yeah. I think you can probably break that link in other ways with neural retraining, but that is the lifestyle way that sleep specialists recommend. Then one more thing is it's ideal if you don't have your cell phone on next to you. It's ideal if you don't have Bluetooth on next to you. It's ideal if you turn off the Wi-Fi at night. Studies actually show that that does impact our sleep quality. So if you have control over those factors, that might be something you want to do for better sleep. I hear it from my clients all the time. They're like, oh, I just did this experiment of like sleeping with my phone off in the other room, and I sleep so much better now. And I'm like, yep. Mm-hmm. So that's super, super common. And people just have no idea how much it's impacting their sleep until they try it. So try it, see what happens. What's the downside?
Yeah. Well, I mean, when you think of it, even if it's not the EMF, this is an arousal device.
Yeah, but it's the EMF. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep. I mean, I'm talking about people who are not looking at the phone at night.
Yes.
I'm talking about people who just have it next to them,
or
just have the Wi-Fi on. That's what the studies have done on, not using them.
Yeah. So there's the EMF thing. I'm talking just separately about the same way when it's near us, like it's always just unconsciously the thing that we go to
get stimulated.
Stimulated. If you go out for a walk without your phone and you feel a little weird.
Yeah.
It's sort of the same thing. It's that thing you just always have with you. It's because you do stuff with it all the time. It's your little dopamine hit machine.
Yes.
So having it somewhere else entirely so that you're just like, oh, I can't just reach over half asleep and turn it on or
yeah,
be listening for an alert or wondering. We have so much of a relationship to these devices now. It just runs in the background. We become very efficient and unconscious with them.
For sure.
Having it also outside the room might be another way to reduce the amount of like cues and unconscious stimulation that's there.
To me, that makes a lot of sense in the context of when we get a little addicted to our devices, right?
It's like if you're trying not to eat cookies and there's cookies in the fridge, right? Like, or whatever. Just anytime you're just like, I'm a little bored.
Yep.
It might be a little boring. It's a little boring to fall back asleep. My phone's right there.
Yeah, totally. Yes, multiple benefits to moving it out of the room. Mm-hmm. I would say the same for like TVs and things like that. If you are tempted or, you're really addicted to TV or something like that, or you're watching a really addictive show, TV may not be the best thing for you to do in your room, right? This is the classic advice about sleep and your bedroom is to not do anything in bed other than sleep and have sex or, intimacy, whatever.
Mm.
I think that's very legit. You don't want to associate your bed with other stimulating activities, right? Because your brain may then try to prepare you to do those things instead when you try to go to sleep. So
It's so efficient. Our brain is so efficient.
it's so amazing. So, from a functional medicine perspective, there are a number of physiological things that can impact your sleep. And if you have one of these things, it doesn't mean that neural retraining won't help your sleep. Actually, the opposite is true. Sometimes neural retraining may correct some of these imbalances on its own. So even if you have one of these things, don't make that assumption that there's no point in neural retraining. That's absolutely not the case. But some of these things, in some cases, may need to be addressed directly. And so I'm happy to talk about them. I think of the things that negatively impact sleep in some various categories. The first one is neurotransmitter imbalances. And neurotransmitter imbalances, of course, are impacted by the state of your nervous system, but they can also be impacted by nutrient deficiencies and things that cause inflammation in the brain and all kinds of stuff like that. Traumatic brain injuries, right? That's a source of inflammation in the brain. Things like that can also impact neurotransmitters. So sometimes it can be helpful to support those neurotransmitter pathways. I have always found the best way to do that to give the precursors of those neurotransmitters. So basically the ingredients that then become that neurotransmitter in the brain. So serotonin is a really important neurotransmitter for sleep, and it turns into melatonin, and that's part of why it's important. So what supports that pathway really well is 5-HTP and vitamin B6. Both of those ingredients are necessary. And if you are not eating a lot of animal protein foods, you may not be getting enough tryptophan in your diet. Turkey is also a really high source of tryptophan, which is why people get sleepy after Thanksgiving dinner often. In addition to the fact that they just ate way too much. That's the other reason they get sleepy. But for many people, turkey is such a potent source of tryptophan that they get a little sleepy. So you could also consider having more turkey in your diet to support that pathway. Sometimes just supporting the serotonin pathway is enough to help somebody make enough melatonin. Sometimes it's not. And I find one of the reasons why it may not be for a lot of people is because of the bright light exposure they're getting at night, right? So bright light exposure in the evening inhibits melatonin production. And that's very well established in the literature. It also increases cortisol, which is actually a stress hormone, but it's also what is secreted when we see bright light to keep us awake. Basically, it's part of the hormonal mechanism to keep us stimulated and alert for daytime to do activities and stuff. So if you're still taking in bright light regularly in the evenings, then you may benefit until you adjust that lifestyle. You may benefit from taking some melatonin. Melatonin is extremely safe. It is very well tolerated by many people, but not all. And typically it's not tolerated by the people who already make enough. Sometimes I've had patients who have been like, oh, I'm really struggling with my sleep. And so I tried some melatonin and I just felt awful the next day. I felt so hungover, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, oh yeah, so you probably didn't need melatonin. What do you know it? When I actually test them for their melatonin levels, they're totally fine. Not everybody needs this, but for some people, it's a huge game changer. And I would say one thing you really need to know about melatonin is melatonin supplements wear off after about 4 to 5 hours. So if you don't want to wake up in the middle of the night and melatonin is really what's helping you sleep, you're going to want to look for a sustained release melatonin. Those are pretty readily available on the market now and in different dosages, but those are designed to release slowly over the course of 6-8 hours or something like that so that you sleep through the whole night. So that's that. And another neurotransmitter pathway that can really be impactful with sleep is the GABA pathway. So GABA is one of our neurotransmitters that's really calming. It's really soothing and relaxing. Most people feel really good when their GABA receptors are stimulated, which is why benzodiazepines are so incredibly addictive, the anxiety medications that are handed out like candy. But you can stimulate that pathway in other ways. What I like to do to help that pathway is a L-theanine GABA combination. GABA does not cross the blood-brain barrier. However, for people who have a leaky blood-brain barrier, which is common, it does. And so for some people, the GABA does make a big difference because their brain is really inflamed. They've got all these pathways in their blood-brain barrier letting things in. So for those people, GABA makes a big difference. The particular product I like a lot for that is called Quicksilver Scientific. That's the brand. And it's a liposomal GABA with L-theanine. And it just has much better absorption than any other GABA and L-theanine product I have found out there. The other neurotransmitter that I see play the biggest role in so many people, especially people with chronic infections or mold illness or heavy metal poisoning or something like that, is histamine. So histamine, it's a neurotransmitter, but it's also a mediator secreted by the immune system. So it serves both purposes. If somebody has toxins built up in the brain, or they've got an infection in the brain, which is common with certain ones, certain viral infections, certain tick-borne infections, really love hanging out in the brain. And those things can increase histamine in addition to other inflammatory mediators. But histamine is a super stimulatory neurotransmitter, so it will keep people awake. That's why the over-the-counter antihistamines are considered sleep medications, right? You'll see them branded as allergy medications, and then you'll also see them branded as sleep medications. So there are some natural ways to help lower histamine if that's part of the problem. Histamine, in addition to making us just feel wide awake, it's really good at that. It can also make you feel anxious. It can also make you feel hot. It can also make you feel itchy. Not necessarily all of those things at once, but those are common features of it. And so if you tend to wake up in the middle of the night and you feel like you're having a hot flash and you're not menopausal, then histamine may be the reason for that. Often that is happening when people are eating high histamine foods for dinner, or they're eating late. And like I said, food comes in with histamine on it. And then if you have a leaky gut barrier, that can then get into the bloodstream and stimulate your brain and cause these hot flashes and whatever else. So some natural ways you can lower histamine are quercetin, rutin, and luteolin all act as mast cell stabilizers, which are the type of cell that release the most histamine. PEA is also a natural thing you can do for that. There are others as well, but those are some of the common ones. Vitamin C also works really well as a mast cell stabilizer. However, you can overdo vitamin C. A lot of people think that's not the case, but what I learned about vitamin C recently is that it can become oxalates in the body. Oxalates can then stimulate more histamine and other problems. So you don't want to be taking like a lot of vitamin C every day. You want to have ideally some sources in your diet. And if you don't have that, then you can take a little bit, like under 250 milligrams a day. If you take really high doses every day, you may have quite a buildup of oxalates, which are a toxin to the body. Okay, I'm going to try to breeze through the last ones because I know I'm running over time. So that's neurotransmitters. The other main category that I like to investigate and look at for people is inflammation more broadly. So if they've got an autoimmune condition, or they're hugely inflamed because of a toxic burden or something like that, even if it's not occurring in the brain, it can still stimulate systemic inflammation, which can go into the brain and then can make somebody's brain overstimulated. Really, one of the best things I've found for lowering inflammation overall at night and helping people sleep is CBD. There's certainly other things you could use in that realm, but CBD is one of my favorites, and it tends to work pretty reliably. The downside to CBD is it can be expensive, and you have to get up to a pretty hefty dose. Sometimes it depends on the person and your weight and your metabolism of CBD. But like for me, I have to take 50 milligrams in order to feel any difference. And so a lot of these little gummies and things like that you'll see in the store are like 10 milligrams. So you're not you're not going to get what you need from that for most adult size humans. And if you're a bigger adult size human, if you are a big guy or something, you're like 250 pounds, you would probably need even more than that to sleep well. My favorite CBD product is by MD Pure. And it's their sort of extra strength tincture of CBD. And it's amazing because it is the cleanest on the market. They test for absolutely all kinds of toxins. And one of the ones they test for that no other brand I've ever found actually tests for is mycotoxins, which are really common in marijuana products, anything that comes from hemp or marijuana. So there's that. THC also can really contribute positively to lowering inflammation and helping people sleep. So, it does have some downsides too, as I'm sure many of you know, but some people find it really helpful. Then the next thing is hormonal, right? What's going on hormonally that might contribute to sleep? The typical players are cortisol, the stress hormone, and estrogen, progesterone for women. Since cortisol is a stress hormone, it's designed to keep you awake. And if it can be going up for different reasons, a lot of people don't realize this, but you could have high cortisol at night because you're stressed. You could have high cortisol at night because your blood sugar is swinging or running too low. And so your body's making cortisol to put more sugar in the bloodstream. Cortisol could also be high at night because of inflammation. So cortisol is secreted to help dampen inflammation in the body when it gets too rampant, which is why the drugs that are used very commonly to dampen inflammation, called the steroids, are basically all mimickers of cortisol. So to lower cortisol at night, my favorite things are phosphatidylserine, which is a phospholipid, and it is made into supplements. And the cheaper brands like Jarrow work just fine. The dose range is typically 100 to 300 milligrams at night. And as far as I know, it's extremely safe because this phospholipid exists in our body naturally already. The other thing is Cortisol Manager. Cortisol Manager has phosphatidylserine in it, but it also has some other herbs and nutrients that also help to lower cortisol. So that's a really popular one. It's made by Integrative Therapeutics, and it works very well for most people that are struggling with high cortisol at night. Let's talk about estrogen, progesterone. When people go through perimenopause and menopause, sleep is often disrupted, and it is because of the changes in their estrogen and progesterone, which then also impact their neurotransmitters. A lot of people, all they associate with perimenopause and menopause is the drastic drop in estrogen that occurs, and that is really important for sleep. However, progesterone also drops dramatically. And sometimes progesterone drops way before estrogen ever drops. And progesterone is it's called a neurosteroid. And it's called that because in the brain, it helps to lower inflammation. And it also helps to increase GABA and some of the other calming neurotransmitters, which is why when women have really bad PMS, they're usually low progesterone. That's usually a very big contributory issue to why they have PMS. In menopause, progesterone drops too. So looking at both of those, if you're in that phase of life, could make an enormous difference to your sleep. And you don't necessarily have to address them with bioidentical hormones, although you could. But if you were going to do that, I would say always, always, always do both. If both are low, supplement with both, because they're meant to balance each other out, and you can cause yourself some major problems by just doing estrogen. You can just do progesterone, though. That is fine, and that is common, actually. But estrogen can play a huge role in whether or not women can sleep at that phase of life as well. And as you probably have noticed, many women, once they get through that phase of life, their brains adapt and they're able to sleep again. So whatever you do to help support your hormones during that time, it's not necessarily forever. So some natural things that a lot of people use are things like wild yam to bind to progesterone receptors, or maca. Particularly the feminescence products of maca are really, really potent for binding to estrogen receptors and helping with that. And those are kind of the really big natural alternatives. Black cohosh, sage can really help if you're having hot flashes, things like that. And then we have nervine herbs, which are really just herbs that calm down the nervous system. I would suggest that you not allow yourself to become dependent on these, but keep doing your neural retraining work so that you don't have to take these for the rest of your life. Because my experience with these is that they're really helpful, but they're usually helpful short term. And your body usually adapts to them over time, and eventually they stop working. And so you don't want to get into a situation where you have to take them every night in order to sleep because you're not doing your nervous system work that you should be doing. But those are things like skullcap and passion flower and kava and albizia, and you'll see tons of sleep formulas at the natural grocery stores that have things like that in there. And then the last consideration is there is a homeopathic I've found to help many people with dysregulated nervous systems to sleep better. And it's the coffea homeopathic. Basically, it's a homeopathic of coffee. So in the world of homeopathy, like treats like. And so if you are over adrenalized, if you were to take a bulk amount of coffee at that point, that would make it a lot worse. But if you take a super, super dilute amount of coffee, i.e. in homeopathic form, it actually makes it better. So that one has been an ace in the hole that has really helped a number of people while they have worked on regulating their nervous system. Okay, that is it. Sorry, I went really long.
Oh, it was fantastic. Are you kidding, Karen? That was fantastic.
I'm sure I forgot some things too, but I hope that covered enough bases for people to feel like they really got something out of this.
So I have a quick question for you. You were talking about with hormones, like when people go through that phase of life. I was surprised to hear it can start in the mid-30s. Is that true?
It is true. Yep.
Okay.
And
So,
actually,
I think a lot of people would be surprised, women would be surprised to learn that it's not when you're in your 40s and 50s, it's as early as your 30s. I didn't know that. Yeah.
Well, those kinds of hormonal changes can occur for other reasons besides your biological clock much earlier than that. Like in my 20s, my estrogen and progesterone were so low that I was basically in postmenopausal levels. That was for a couple of years before I figured out how to rebalance that. It can happen quite young, so don't just wipe that off the slate because you're not in your 40s yet. It could be playing a role, and you can easily test those to find out.
Yeah. And so, having really high stress levels and things like that, again, regulation can play. It's sort of a big balancing game, right? Mm-hmm. But the whole reason why we really focus on regulation is because it is so foundational. Could you speak a little bit to how the members can use your Curitin method course, where they might be able to go and look at all this for some more specifics? Because you mentioned a lot of things, but how do they go about actually taking action to put this into effect?
Before I get into that, I forgot to mention magnesium. I just wanted to say that, other nutrient deficiencies can impact your sleep, and magnesium is a really, really big one. So the best forms of magnesium and for sleep are RNA Reset is the brand, Remag is the product. It's a liquid magnesium that you drink throughout the day slowly in your water bottle. That's the best absorbed form I have found, like hands down. But beyond that, a lot of people also really like magnesium threonate and magnesium bisglycinate because both of those get into the brain, and bisglycinate has 2 glycines on it, and glycine is a calming neurotransmitter. So it's kind of like a twofer. So you could try any of those. In regards to the Curitin method, it is still in progress, and I'm sorry we haven't finished that yet. However, we do already have scripts written for some of the things that are not up there yet. So hopefully we'll get to record those soon. But the Curitin method right now has information on there about infections and toxins that can be playing a role in your health, and some general sort of lifestyle factors as well. And in those modules, I talk about your testing options. I talk a little bit about treatment options, although I plan to go more in depth on that in the future. But yes, you can go there and feel free to ask us more questions as you go through that material that may come up if you haven't checked that out yet.
Yeah. I'm not sure if you've addressed it already yet, or if it's something to come, is again, how to have this be a resource so that you're more empowered when you go in to work with your own naturopathic physician or doctor or whoever it is that you're working with, so that you can bring this to them or have some better senses for, again, there's just so much to learn out there, and you really were able to find some pretty remarkable ways to get results for your patients. It's just a fantastic resource that you're putting together here, again, to complement rebalancing the entire system. Once we've brought our unconscious stress patterning more under control, you may have underlying issues, like you mentioned, the infections or hormonal issues. Or I love what you're saying. The message is, it's like, oh, this is gonna be something you have to do the rest of your life. I love hearing that you say a lot of these things are just for a season, versus these are things that are a good idea to include. You might want to have it for the rest of your life, like making sure you have plenty of magnesium. It's just so empowering to have that as a resource. And so it's just super cool that it's there. Thanks so much for bringing all that to the table. It's so cool. And people have sweet dreams. What's your bedtime story? What's your bedtime story you're telling yourself? I think that's like the new way to talk about it. Upset, if you're getting ready for bed, it's gonna be great. Whatever happens, what are you dreaming about? What do you want to create? What's the life you love? What are you excited about? And, as life presents us with whatever it is that's in front of us, like, how can we roll with it and flow with it and be more relaxed and enjoy as much of it as we can? And if that's what you want. Just what do you want,
Yes. Love it.
I want to be free to be happy, whatever happens when I'm sleeping or not sleeping or whatever. I want to be able to have a very happy day.
Yes. All right. Thanks everybody for joining us, for tuning in, and for giving some comments. We appreciate it. We did have one other comment. Somebody said somatic tracking really helps them to fall back to sleep. So if you haven't checked out that style of process in the program yet, check it out.
Good one. Yeah. All right.
All right. We'll see you guys next week.
Bye.
Ciao.